Hello and welcome back to the Build Your Purpose podcast. This week we welcome a modern day pirate, a coach, speaker and facilitator helping organisations and individuals to be more pirate. An author and podcast host, my guest this week has built a network that is powering change, challenging the norm and reshaping businesses globally. Alex Barker, welcome to the Build Your Purpose podcast.
Hi Tom, it's really good to be here.
No, thank you so much. It's a conversation that I've been really looking forward to. And we're going to kick it off the same way we kick off all conversations on the pod. And that's with the intention of finding out what drives you by asking you, Alex Barker, what is your purpose?
Such a big question. The cop-out answer would be, I help people to be more pirate. But given that your listeners probably don't know what that means yet, I would say that I help people to unlearn things that no longer serve them or support them, and decondition themselves from outdated ways of doing things.
Interesting.
It's a sophisticated way of saying break the rules.
Yeah, challenge the rules. Yeah, I think maybe that's a good place to start, because I first came across you probably actually during lockdown, which now seems like an age ago, when I first read or had read to me through Audible, Be More Pirate, and then since obviously How to Be More Pirate. So maybe if you could give the listeners a bit of a background to that, because I personally think it's a book, well, both books were so impactful on the way I look at problems, organisations and outlook on life, that I do feel that a lot of people could get a lot of value from it. So maybe if you could just define what it means to be more pirate. What do we mean when we say that?
Yeah, no, of course. So the original book, Be More Pirate, which is written by my co-pirate, Sam Conniff, essentially reframes the history of the golden age of piracy, which was this tiny period of time, 30 years, 1695 to 1725 roughly, where you saw this, well, arguably the world's biggest workplace rebellion, where sailors in the Navy, ordinary working class people, decided to rise up, challenge the establishment, because the establishment was out exploiting and plundering the world. And what was born out of that was what we call piracy. And it's the version of pirates that we think of when we think of pirate. It's the Walt Disney, Captain Hook, cartoon villain pirate, really, because the golden age of piracy birthed Blackbeard, Edward Teach, who kind of is the one that all the stereotypes are based on. So that's the reason that we sort of feel that pirates need a reframe, because actually in that period where the stereotypes are born was in fact a period that completely changed the rules of the game for how ordinary people could live and work together. So the really interesting point about the Pirate Rebellion is that despite what we think of them, it birthed all these new progressive ideals. Pirate crews had democratic organising structures. They had a voting system that allowed everyone to be heard and seen. They had real diversity. You had female pirates, you had black pirates. They had social insurance systems, same-sex marriage, accountable leadership, which was unheard of at the time. Most Navy captains were tyrants. So all in all, pirates were we would describe them as the social revolutionaries of the 1600s, not the troublemakers that we think of when we imagine pirates. And what the book is about is essentially that story, but reframing pirates. But then it takes some of the core principles of what pirates did and how they did it, and looks at how we can apply that to sort of modern business or modern organisations, and gives lots of examples of people that Sam thinks are pirate. We debate whether some of those people are pirate. It creates a healthy debate about what the characteristics of pirate are. So the original book has a framework, the 5 R's, which is like the only pirate pun. It's just a terrible dad joke. But it essentially it's, rebel, break the rules, but rewrite the rules. So you've got to put something new in its place. Reorganize yourselves. So that's about collaboration to create scale instead of growth from the center. Redistribute power. Redistribute power is, for me, the most important one. And retell the story. So weaponize the story. This is where the Jolly Roger and all the amazing pirate branding came in. So those are the kind of core principles, and we look at people who've done that and applied it. But when I came into Be More Pirate, I came 8 months after the first book was published. Sam had advertised for a right-hand pirate, and I was adamant that I wanted to make sure that these concepts could genuinely be applied to real people's lives, that they weren't just a kind of marketing ploy that sounded like fun, but people couldn't really use. And so I interrogated Sam's framework a little bit, which he doesn't, that's what he was looking for, and looked at, how do you really reorganize yourselves, what works. And I'm in a way, although we wrote the second book, How to Be More Pirate, which is case studies and stories of people who've applied the ideas in the original book, I'm still doing that work. I'm still interrogating the framework and figuring out, especially as the world changes so rapidly, how do we change things? And that's what I said at the beginning around my purpose, around all breaking the rules and rewriting the rules really is unlearning old ways of doing things and figuring out how you do them better. And there's so much that goes into that process that you have to,
absolutely. And it sounds like a sort of continuously iterative as well. You're always trying to evolve it and mold it to, as you say, what's happening around the world. And we've seen some huge changes around the world, particularly in the last sort of 18 to 20 months or so. And so I suppose on a granular level, how does the mindset and the attitude of being more pirate manifest itself in your everyday life? What lessons have you taken from it that are particularly pertinent to Alex Barker, the person sitting opposite me?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I think that, I probably turned to be more pirate before I even read the book in a way, because, and this has happened to lots of people who found the book, that it's spoken to them for reasons that predate reading the book, because they've, for whatever reason, understood inherently that old structures, institutions, ways of doing things aren't working for them, and they're kind of struggling against those. And a lot of people come to me and say, Be More Pirate gave a language to what I was already experiencing. And I think that's what had happened to me. I had worked in a place where I just kept thinking, we are not really creating any impact here. Like I came to the organisation I worked for before Be More Pirate because I wanted to make change in the world. And what we were doing was just, what they always say, rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We weren't really doing anything. We were creating reports, hoping those reports got seen by the right people. But all I was really seeing or experiencing was two things. The world around me seemingly getting worse, this sort of post-Brexit, Trump take one, inequality growing rapidly, the climate crisis getting worse. And I just thought, but what are we really doing about this? Are we actually taking this seriously? And then internally, there were all these small rules that just seem to hamper things. Like, it would just be things like, part of my job was creating networks, and I would be trying to connect people, but they'd be like, oh, you can't do it that way. You can't connect them across that platform. I didn't really have license or permission to just be like, well, let's do whatever it takes to make sure that these people speak to each other. There were all these just, ways of doing things, and I didn't necessarily think that they were justified. So that's what was going on, coupled with some personal crises. But all, the personal crises are just a wake up, right? They're just a wake up to shake you out of your complacency, to recognize that whatever you're doing in your life right now isn't working. So I think there was all that predated Be More Pirate. And I think when I read the book, I could see that I was already setting off down that path. But now that I've obviously been doing it for 5 years, I think there's some key things that I do think about and use in my day-to-day life all the time. I have a completely different relationship with uncertainty and the unknown, partly from just the nature of the work that we do and being self-employed now as opposed to before. I kind of enjoy it. I have a very, a view on, although for sure there are possibly bad things that are going to happen down the line as a result of not, things that we can't predict. But I also am absolutely certain there are going to be amazing things down the line that I can't predict. And so I just don't worry about it either way, in a way that I wouldn't have done before. I think three big pirate things that are covered in How to Be More Pirate. One is, and this is because these are the parts that I really wrote and that really meant something to me. One is going off the edges of the map, which is really disrupting your day-to-day life in some way, shape or form, whether that's talking to different kinds of people, going to different places, like always trying to be the explorer. Whereas I didn't before. I was in the same bubble day in, day out. I talked to the same kind of people with the same kind of background as me about the same things. And no wonder we weren't solving any problems. I mean, so now I have a really vast and diverse network of people. And although I don't always understand their point of view sometimes, but I appreciate it so much. There's edges of the map. There's what I call follow the signs, which is a very piratey. It's about intuition. It's about, and I know that this may seem to, woo for some people, but I really follow the signs that I see in the world. I'll give you an example. I was reading an article, I'd say it was about 6 months ago now. It was about the current Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which I studied when I was younger, so I have had a sort of background understanding and interest in. And I was reading this article that was about, it was two couples therapists talking about the conflict. And I read this article and I thought, I've never, ever heard this conflict talked about in this way before. We all hear all the various arguments back and forth. And the way that these two women were trying to connect across a divide that was so filled with historical hatred and trauma was remarkable to me. I was like, this is genuinely really different. This is a different kind of conversation. Anyway, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about it in the shower, next couple of weeks, mulling it over. And then I held a pirate meetup. I hold sort of like regular online meetups for people to come and drop in. And always there's someone random who's never heard of the book, doesn't know what they're doing there. And one day this guy shows up a couple of weeks later and he goes, yeah, I've got this idea, this project I've been writing about for about 6 months and I don't know what to do with, and I thought this might be a good home for it. And he said, it's politics looking through the lens of couples therapy. And I was like, damn, I have literally been thinking about that for the last 2 weeks. And it just felt so serendipitous. It was one of those, it was like a follow the signs moment where I was like, right, I'm meant to somehow pursue this. I just gut feeling, pursue this. And so, we talked and we decided to explore it. And then recently we ran a workshop at a conference that I've done a few talks at before, and we trialed it out and it went down really well. And it's all about, I guess it's about a different way of bridging divides in society, given that we're so polarized. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that's something I do, follow the signs. And the last one is the small, bold actions, which is just doing small acts of courage as often as you can. So I did it at a conference last week. There's someone I really wanted to talk to, and I was like, I feel nervous and I could just avoid this. The only person who's going to know that I have or haven't done this is me. But I was like, come on, like these are the moments, even if it's uncomfortable and awkward, which it kind of was a bit. I just thought,
go for it.
You've got to, like, come on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great because it sounds as if you kind of package it up as being more pirate has manifested itself with you as really sort of enhancing a growth mindset. You've taken the leap of faith to go and speak to that person. You've been open to what the future may hold, whether it's for the better or the worse. And I think having that mindset is so important because it does open up opportunities for you. I wonder if we go back to when you took the leap from being in that environment where you felt that you weren't having the impact you wanted to as an organisation, because maybe there are people listening to this that feel like that in their organisations. How did you go about negotiating with either superiors or colleagues at the organisations you were working with to begin that conversation of, we're not doing what we want to be doing here, let's do it differently? Because I think it speaks to, I think, something that I have a real passion for, which is being open to as much feedback as you possibly can. How did you break down those structures that allowed you then to start having those conversations about enhancing impact, doing things a bit differently? Because I suppose once you start that conversation, then, as you say, you can be open to the future, whether it's for the better or the worse, but probably hopefully for the better.
I didn't have any of those conversations. That's why I'm so interested in it now. I didn't. Let me be clear. Although I was frustrated, I had no idea how to go about challenging or changing anything. I certainly didn't think it was possible. I think I voiced my frustrations in the pub I would say that was the general approach. I had a great line manager actually at my previous job, who I'm still friends with, and he was not the barrier, but he just, there's only so far up we could go. We changed things in our team, but our team was functioning pretty well. It was kind of the rest of the organisation that we couldn't really do anything with. And I look back and I think there probably was, if I'd taken it more seriously, there probably was things I could have done. And obviously I know them now because I try to help others in other organisations do. So I can only speak to what I see now. And the first thing is you've got to do strength in numbers. Like actually in my previous job, we had a big sort of network. We all talked to each other a lot. And had we actively banded together and taken it seriously and said, let's change some things, we might have had some success.
Build the crew, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't know. I think actually, to be honest, although I was frustrated at that point in time, it wasn't urgent enough. And actually the organisation I was in have gone through a huge sort of internal mutiny in the last 4 years. So they really
led by you? Or?
No. I mean, I did muscle in on it.
Yeah.
but no, it was led by some amazing other people who were suffering day in, day out from the impact of it. But it did end up in it got so serious that they had to do something. So the idea is that we don't leave it up until that point.
Be proactive, yeah.
Yeah, but I think so. Having a group together, working out, the way that we support organisation to try and do this stuff is like, work out what is really within your gift to do. So don't try and do the whole thing at once. Work out what's within your area of influence and expertise as well. What hill do you want to die on? I would often say to them, because you can't fight every battle. And if you're going to fight a fight and you think it's going to have consequences on your, potentially on your position, your career trajectory, or your, mental health, then that has to be taken seriously, and you have to know it's a fight really worth fighting.
Yeah.
So those are all questions to consider beforehand.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard through the books, obviously, and I've listened to the other podcasts that you've done, and obviously the ones that Sam has done as well, talking about defining the things, how the process that pirates went through of defining things that they're willing to die for and the things that they're willing to not stand for, and finding the middle ground. And that's where they had their success. And that, I kind of suppose, feeds into purpose around organisations. What are we willing to die for, and what do we stand for? When it comes to implementing piracy, purpose, that sort of sweet spot into organisations, when you're going in and having those conversations now in your role, what are some of the leading questions or open-ended questions that you ask to decision makers to get them to start thinking about defining their values and their purpose?
What's your tolerance for risk? Do you have a sense, even just if it's just a gut feeling? And obviously risk changes in different circumstances, but like, where are you, do you think, on that spectrum? Because, let's be clear. We live and work in a system where profit trumps purpose. And no matter how many organisations tell me that it's purpose first, that is incredibly difficult to do. It's expensive, it's hard, and you're up against people who will outcompete you in the market because they don't put purpose first. And yes, things are changing, and there's been changing for years. But when you're in it, and I speak to lots and lots of purpose-driven businesses or businesses that are attempting to be responsible, and it's really challenging, and a lot of them fold. And I don't want to be anything but honest about that. We are up against a system that is inherently, exploitative. And don't get me wrong, I want to go in and help change what we can change, for sure, because there's still a lot of benefit and joy in doing that as well.
But it is challenging.
It is. Let's be real. I was at this conference last week, which was just a massive gathering of people who care about responsible business. And there's a degree of, like, everyone I think has a degree of cynicism around the ratio of talk to action in these things. But, the one incredible woman who stood up in a session, she's a hairdresser on a high street in Winchester, and she said, I am trying so hard to be a responsible employer. It is expensive. And the budget came in like on the same day, and she was like, we're not going to be able to hire apprentices anymore. Like, and then I heard the same thing repeated on LBC on the radio the next day, saying another hairdresser calling in saying, we can't do this. We can't hire apprentices anymore under this budget. And that feels like a really big part of social mobility and giving alternatives to kind of university, and it impacts so much in the system. So, you know, she's just like a kind of a call for help. Like, what do we do? Like, do I just go the shortcut route that everybody else is going in order to survive, or not? Or do I try and stick to this? And it's all these kinds of things about, you know, how you look after employee well-being, how you how well, you know, with hairdressers, like how well you train people, and how much that costs money, that costs time. But health and safety is such a big thing, obviously, if you're touching people's heads and stuff all day. With sharp objects, you'd have to do background checks, and there's all these things I wouldn't have thought of, which she was explaining. So
I was going to come on to a conversation I had on a recent episode with Julia Davies, who is an impact investor. She sold her stake in Osprey, the outdoor clothing company, and has since gone on to do some incredible things. And we spoke about this same topic, about how being, particularly an SME or a startup, trying to be purpose-led and trying to actually do good without, you know, taking purpose over profit, as opposed to the other way around. And a lot of the organisations that she invests in in the startup stage have succeeded, but a lot of them haven't, for the reasons we spoke about. And that comes into socioeconomic, you know, global security, procurement, everything that we've spoken about. I suppose, from your perspective of being more pirate and implementing that process within the global context, where are the big opportunities for organisations to make a stand and make a change? What do you see as, because I think there's that famous saying that's in Japanese, the kanji for crisis is two symbols, danger and opportunity. So at the moment we are in a crisis environmentally, economically, in terms of security. Within that crisis there has to be danger, but there also must be opportunities as well. And I think you'd be best placed to shine a light on the ones.
Because of course, like it almost has to get too dangerous or dangerous enough for us to change. Right? If it doesn't feel threatening enough, we don't change. I think the opportunity is to change everything, right? To flip everything on its head. And I was having a conversation with a client this morning who is an SME and working out their purpose. And we were talking, you know, about the things that were very doable around sort of the action behaviours of the team and how you embed those values. But then we ended up talking about, I mean, this is something that they didn't really know about, because just the nature of the business that they're in is so far removed from sustainability. You know, I was talking about what it would take to be a regenerative business, for example, like across everything, regenerative for people, regenerative for planet, looking at, you know, how would you build in a circular economy model, but even just help, you know, looking at business through the metaphor of like, you know, humans aren't machines, we're organisms. So using a garden metaphor to think about how you build a business, like how do you help, you know, it's ultimately about watering all of your individual team so that they can grow and thrive. They're not a mechanism that produces the same thing day in, day out. Inherently, they have seasons. They need, you know, you need a diverse ecosystem, which means lots of different kinds of people and different activities in order to kind of thrive. And just, I think that was not something that they'd heard before, as a way to completely almost like rewrite the rules of their business. They'd started and simply picked up the manual of every other business that had been built and gone, right, this is how we do things. And they're starting to implement things and then realising that we've got an MD because we thought someone told us we should have one, and do we need one? And this questioning of... So
it's almost taking that step back and going, actually, we're at step one. Let's go back to step zero and go challenge every question of going, do I need this in the business? Do I need this in my life? Rather than saying, because people have done it before me, let's go and do it. And I think that's so interesting that it comes back to the golden age of pirates, as you say. And I think hopefully people listening to this will be thinking, Christ, I didn't know that about pirates. You know, and I speak to people all the time, because it's one of my favourite books, both of them, talking to people and saying how they have insurance schemes. You know, if you lost a leg on a pirate ship, you got like 12 pieces of 8 or something, and you could retire on it. And if you were in the merchant navy or, you know, sailing under the flag of Holland or, you know, or Great Britain, you would get nothing. You wouldn't even get paid half the time. And how they had democratic votings on who the captain would be, and they shared in those leadership contexts. I think it's so interesting that area, there's so much misconception about pirates and what they stood for and where it came from, and how all these businesses can learn from them looking at a scenario in a system where they probably had similar conversations to what's happening now in every office building and boardroom, which is we're stuck in a system that doesn't work. But they decided to go and do something, albeit pretty drastic, but they did it. And I wonder if there's a way of communicating that to people that feel like they really want to do something differently, but that are struggling to do so. As you said, you work with clients who've gone down the rabbit hole of having an MD or having the structure and going, hang on, we don't need this. How do you implement an environment where people can feel safe to have those conversations, but also without the pressure of the next quarterly review, the next budget, the next whatever? How can people have the time and the perspective, do you think, that will give them the opportunity to be more pirate?
Yeah, well, that's the fight I'm fighting. There's lots of different things that need to happen to enable that shift, and it's like all activism, all change. There's lots of different levers you can pull here. I mean, from the safety point of view, we could do a lot more in terms of training and awareness around what creates the psychological safety needed for people to be able to offer a healthy, constructive challenge to a business. And that is non-existent in a lot of places that I'm in. That people just think it's not worth it. It's not worth speaking up. I won't be listened to, and if I am, there's a good chance people will think I'm. But then also people aren't taught how to do it in a way. And I do this in workshops a lot, like taking some time out to think about how you have a conversation that connects rather than divides. I mean, it's really simple, and there's loads of research on it for about how to do this, how to, when you're on, I mean, this is what I was saying about the politics as couples therapy and why I'm so interested in it, because I see this play out all the time. People will come into the conversations in the rooms and be like, I'm the pirate and I'm going to be the challenger, but they don't challenge in the way that actually gets results. And no pirate would ever do that, because again, you're very strategic as a pirate. Like you want to get the prize. So you've got to think it through. Like, how am I going to convince them to give over that's how pirates essentially got their goods. They thought about what strategies could we use to actually enable, push the enemy into surrender. Yeah. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to push the enemy into surrender, but it's not, in a modern sense, we need different tactics. Yeah. So that one aspect, just training and enabling people to have conversations, challenging conversations in the right way is huge. Yeah. I think, sometimes it is simply about the leaders and the leaders being forward thinking enough. And that has a lot to do with how they're interacting with the world and who they're exposed to and what kind of things they're exposed to. There was a period of time when I heard lots of our clients who were very senior, the thing that made them take sustainability seriously was conversations with their children. It was
about the future.
Yeah, it's my kids now saying, "Why don't you? Why are you working for this company? Why are we not Why are we not recycling? Why are you not coming to a protest with me?" And this is, this shook them at an emotional level, and everyday business strategy meetings. It doesn't have an emotional resonance. So some of it is exposure to the issues in proximity has a big difference. And then if you can catalyze a leader, that often has a sort of trickle down effect. Not always. Yeah. It depends. But so that's a big lever, I think.
So I got that emotional energy, and also I think, someone else's perspective on what you're doing. Because there's a quote that always sticks with me from when I was at uni, actually, when we're doing conservation, where obviously everybody in the room is of the same opinion that environmentalism is very important, conservation is extremely important. It should be very high up on the agenda. And our lecturer, we were all sort of, it was a confirmation bias activity without knowing it. We were sort of confirming each other's bias that, yes, we are right, this should be on the agenda. But our lecturer came in and said, well, if you're in the room and everyone in the room as you has the same opinion, you're in the wrong room. You need to go into a different, because that's when you start to get the perspective of the challenges that you may come up against. And I think a lot of the time, people do kind of go, oh, why not? And then they give up. So I think it's very much the case, particularly for conservationists, I think it very much is a case of trying to rewrite it, I suppose, come at it from a different angle, have that different perspective. Because if people in boardrooms can do it, people in conservation arenas can do it as well. And I think it's very much needed, as we spoke about, we're at a crisis point globally. There's a massive opportunity for people to be more pirate, to rewrite the norm, challenge the infrastructures that we're coming up against. Because let's be honest, from an environmental perspective, we're losing the battle. We just had the Conservatives who aren't in power, but even they've said we're not going to bother with net zero anymore. It's not an issue.
I saw her speak last week
in person.
I mean, I'm going to say this on a podcast, but I saw her speak in person to a room of people largely involved in tackling environmental challenges. And in a 30-minute speech, she didn't mention the environment once. On a speech about the future of Britain, and this
wasn't
to me
even on the agenda.
The agenda was come and talk about the future of Britain. I think given the net zero comments that happened recently, I think we were expecting them to be addressed, and they were addressed in the questions afterwards. But I think we were all surprised that it just wasn't
given the audience she's speaking to. as well,
partly given the audience, but also I'm mentioning this because I'm constantly surprised at the divide between the people who think about it all the time and it's like the backdrop now of everything we have to organise around in terms of how we're thinking about the future, and the people who are like see it as a secondary issue.
Yeah.
So
it's either on the table or it's not on the table for a lot of people, isn't it? It's that situation of either being the guiding principle behind everything you do, or it's something that you can think about if you've got the time to do it. And maybe, I suppose, in answer to one of the questions before about environments that are ripe for plundering, for want of a better phrase, for being more pirate, probably is maybe Westminster, for someone to come in and disrupt it massively and start rewriting the rules. Because it's been going for the political system's been going the same way for hundreds and hundreds of years. And I think we were all probably under the impression that it's a little bit broken, doesn't actually particularly work. How different are the two parties? Is there actually any distinction between their policies? And has anybody benefited apart from the top 1% in the last 50, 60 years? Maybe that's the environment that it could become more pirate. But I suppose that would probably be quite a difficult fight to take on. And we see a Jolly Roger flying above Buckingham Palace in Westminster, maybe.
I'd love it. I think, look, yes, and I rarely come across people who tell me, I think being more pirate is not needed. Most people agree with the need for change. It's the how that's hard, and for various reasons. One being the level of distraction and overwhelm that we as sort of individuals experience now. We are, I think, at capacity when it comes to volume of information, which has quite a profound effect, even if we're not noticing it on a day-to-day basis. But I think we all could do better at looking at people who've successfully created change and actually breaking down how they do it and trying to copy it. Like, for example, that's why I do work with women, helping them to speak better, because one aspect of real change makers is usually that they know how to articulate their vision well. And at every opportunity, they will tell you what that vision is. Yeah. And that's not enough on its own, but it's a key part. They know how to convince other people. They're good at influencing individuals. They know the balance between pushing and compromise. Yeah. They, take action. They don't procrastinate. There's a bit of a plan, but are open also to the opportunities. So there's all these different aspects of what works, and I think
looking back at what's gone before is important. And I think that's a great moment to actually go more onto one of my favourite topics, which is piracy and pirates. And we've obviously got the pirate queens of Anne Bonny and Grace O'Malley and Charlotte de Barry. And these, you speaking there about women change makers. They probably were maybe not names that anybody listening have heard of before, particularly if, they may have heard of them, but not in the way they'll heard stories about female pirates, but they haven't put sort of names to faces and stories, as it were. Of the three, if you had to, and it's a basic question, but of the three, who would you say was the sort of the key change maker and the one that really was the trailblazer in that environment?
Well, Charlotte de Barry, I think, was not confirmed as even historically
It's a mythical.
Yeah, Missy's mythical, but I mean that doesn't matter. I mean, sort of she lives in
memory.
myth. But
Yeah.
I mean, I know less about Grace O'Malley, so I know much more about Anne Bonny.
Tell us about Anne Bonny.
Yeah, and of course you can't leave Mary Read out of the picture of Anne Bonny because they come as a duo. So yeah, I love the story of Anne Bonny, and we always describe her as sort of proto-feminist in that she changed the ideas of what was possible for women at the time. A bit of a love-hate figure, but all pirates were. Not everyone approved. But Anne Bonny, interesting. She originally from Ireland, ran away to sea, married a very I wouldn't say incompetent pirate, lesser pirate, James Bonny, who she then left. She left all the men, which I also admire to some degree. She then married another pirate, was partnered up with another pirate, Calico Jack Rackham, who I do think they based the character of Captain Jack Sparrow on. And I know it's typically known to be Keith Richards, but you look at the descriptions of Calico Jack Rackham, it's very similar to how Jack Sparrow is portrayed. Amidst this, she met Mary Read. And the interesting thing about both of them is that Mary Read came from a much more working class background. Anne Bonny was from a fairly well-to-do background. Mary Read joined the army originally, but both of them disguised themselves as men in order to be sort of accepted and, well, not even to be accepted, but to pass and to sort of go unnoticed, at least in the army. When they became pirates, I think they were a bit more out and proud, but at least in the army and the navy, because Mary Read was in the army, ended up getting outed, but married one of her comrades. And the army seemingly didn't seem to mind this. And unfortunately, then they left the army, bought a pub, as far as I remember, and then he died of a horrible disease. And so she was on her own again. Not great to be like poor female in the sort of 1600s. And she decided to join the navy this time, try her luck at sea. Again, disguised herself as a man, called herself Mark. And that's how, eventually that navy ship got captured by pirates, and actually ended up with Anne Bonny on a ship. And they, formed a ferocious partnership. I mean, the historians think that some historians believe that they were in a relationship as well, as homosexuality was quite celebrated by pirates. I don't know if you can never really confirm these things one way or the other. It's open to interpretation. But I think the interesting thing about Anne Bonny particularly is there's a picture of her, a drawing that was in the General History of Pirates, which was the pirate history tome at the time. I have a copy that the British Library sent me very generously.
That's cool.
And in it, they have a picture of Anne Bonny, and she's sort of half naked, holding a massive pirate, a Jolly Roger, and she's sort of surrounded by various sort of crew members, and I think there's a skeleton in the background, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but in terms of the positioning of the picture, if you look at it side by side with the painting Lady Liberty Leading the People, which is painted by Delacroix, which is in the Louvre, one of the world's most famous paintings, they're so similar, like in terms of depiction. And I think like most historians can agree that it's very likely that was the influence on the painting, because he was thought to be, he was known to be fascinated by pirates. And then obviously that painting inspired the Statue of Liberty. So we've got this thread through that maybe she's, Statue of Liberty is a pirate. And there's so many.
That's my favourite fact.
I know. I thought I wanted to share that with you because it's fun. And
I've told that a few times to people at, in the pub and dinner, and they're like, no, they just don't believe it. I probably preclude it with saying that the Statue of Liberty is based on a pirate, and they'll go, no. And then you tell them the story, and they realise, oh, okay. And it brings piracy back into the conversation, because it's just such a cool story that from everything she went through, that she may be standing there, in immortalised.
Today,
it's so cool.
Like, what the hell, guys? This was not the point of this.
No.
Because I think
we've gone backwards.
We've gone backwards. We are sliding backwards. Like, lots of the pirate ideals. I mean, there's lots of historians believe that those pirate ideals were what started, the seeds of the American Constitution around democracy. And because so many of the pirates ended up obviously in the Caribbean and then on the mainland. So, yeah, I mean, God, she must be, I'd say turning in her grave, turning in her, statue.
Statue, yeah.
Yeah, looking over.
Yeah, particularly as we spoke there just about, how they were the first organisations really to have an insurance scheme.
Yes.
And since the fires, we've seen apparently that insurance providers in America have cancelled lots of fire protection policies, which just shows that how far we've come, not come backwards. And yeah, I think there's a huge amount we can learn from pirates in that scenario. Well, she certainly probably isn't particularly pleased with where the world is and what we've come to, because I think what I would like people to learn from this pod is that there is a group of people in history that have rewritten the system, and if anyone is feeling as if their purpose is to rewrite the organisation they're within or rewrite the values that they stand for personally, there is a history of people doing it before them in quite spectacular fashion during that age, and that's a great moment to come on to the closing quickfire questions. I could talk all day about pirates, but unfortunately we can't.
But I also don't want to come across as negative in the sense of like, I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't 100% believe that if the pirates could do this in the 1600s, that we can't do this today. I think we can, and there are loads of examples out there. They just don't get necessarily the mainstream traction in terms of what we hear and see. There are so many people pushing back and doing and rebuilding a new system. Yeah.
And they're very eloquently portrayed in How to Be More Pirate. All the organisations and individuals doing it. So if people did want to find out how to do what we've spoken about, there's a book out there for them. And that leads on to the first question with the quickfires, which is a book that you think should be on everyone's bookshelf. Aside from the obvious, obviously.
I know, right? Our books. I mean, I wanted to pick one for the moment of now and something short that people can read. And so I'd go for On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, which is lessons from the 20th century on how tyranny and fascism manifests.
Wow. Particularly pertinent.
And it's really short, so you can get through it quickly.
Yeah. Well, there you go. A short book on a vast subject.
Pirates like to keep it simple.
Yes, quite. And then question 2 is a time in your journey where failure then led to success.
Oh, I mean, I don't even think of things as failures anymore. Like, they're just simply blips in the road to the journey is a destination and all that. I mean, if I was going to pick one though, I did try to train to become a fitness instructor at one point. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking because I wasn't particularly fit, and I liked going out a lot. I was about 25, and I was good at the written exam because I can do the academic side, and then I got into the practical test. Hadn't done any of the work, and I brought my friend with me who was horrifically hungover as my demo person, and she said, "Please tell me they're not going to make me actually run on the treadmill as a demo." I was like, "No. Literally, I just have to show that I can tell you how to get on and off it, or you'll just have to walk for like 5 seconds." But then the instructor was like, no, just get her to run for a little bit. And I was like, she was looking at me like I might throw up here. Anyway, needless to say, I failed that test.
Yeah.
But I think I'd realised at that point, and it was an interesting lesson, that I had gotten, it was 2009 post financial crisis, and I had become emotionally exhausted with trying to apply for 1 million unpaid internships, and hence I'd taken this new track. And I think that was a good reminder to realise, be more persistent.
Yeah.
Like, come on, like. And I think this is something also I see from all the pirates in our network. I've heard so many times over the last few years, people go, I can't do this anymore. I'm just going to go and stack shelves in Sainsbury's. And I'm like, no, you just need a break.
Yeah.
You just need a moment. Your purpose will never go away. It just doesn't. Like, every time I try to avoid or escape it, I end up coming back round.
It's still there.
It's still there. Like, I still want to change things.
It's a great point, yeah, because I think people do. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to fulfill your dreams, your goals, your ambitions. And I spoke with Holly Budge on a previous episode. She said the exact same thing. She set these goals to climb Everest and skydive from the height of Everest. And it's not easy. You don't just decide you're going to go and do it and then suddenly you're at base camp ready to go. Like, you have to just, take breaks, but then try and be as persistent as possible. And that leads us on to the third question, which is ask all my guests to write a postcard to their 20-year-old self, which imparts some wisdom that you've learnt along the way that you wish you'd known at 20, essentially life lessons that you wish 20-year-old Alex knew, what would yours be?
I actually think it was that I just said. I just wrapped them up into both. It's like your purpose will never go away. So stop trying to avoid it.
Be persistent. Yeah, it's such a great lesson. Yeah, being persistent is, I think, the key to a lot of it, and just continuing to keep pushing.
Yeah, and also that, to recognise that, getting to where you want to is 60% persistence and like 20% luck and 20% talent.
Yeah.
Dare I say that?
There's hope for all of us then, if it's just that. Well, honestly, Alex, thank you so much for sitting down with me. The final part now is just to say, where can we learn more about how to be more pirate? How can we engage with you, reach out to you, obviously, to implement everything you've spoken about in organisations across the world, hopefully? Yeah,
so you can always visit our website. There's info on there. There's a link to our meetup group. I host regular sort of online meetups if you want to come and say hi in person. We're at Be More Pirate on social media. I write a lot on LinkedIn, which is like the least cool social media platform, but where I seem to gain the most traction. So I'm on LinkedIn, and if you want to follow along on there. So I think, and you can always email me at alex@bemorepirate.com. Super simple.
Brilliant. Well, I would 100% recommend reading both the books because they've had a big influence on me. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the Build Your Purpose podcast. It's been fantastic.
It's been a pleasure.
No, thank you.